Today, we are going to list some tips for toy soldier collectors who can no longer describe themselves as beginners in the hobby. To assist us with this topic, we have a special guest. His name is Scott, a member of the Ottawa chapter of the Ontario Model Soldiers Society. Scott is also a YouTuber. The name of his YouTube channel is Scott's Soldiers.
Scott, we've already done a video on tips for toy soldier collectors who are brand new.
Right.
And that was very popular. So I said to myself, well, there's obviously interest in this topic, and you have provided us with some great tips for new toy soldier collectors. What about toy soldier collectors who are a little bit more advanced in terms of the amount of time they've spent on the hobby? And I'd like to talk about some of those issues that would confront a toy soldier collector who's more advanced with the hobby.
Yeah, more mature in terms of their experiences and perhaps the size of their collection and even in age. Yeah, I preface this by saying that all of this is opinion, and your viewers, not everyone's going to agree or share my opinion, and really whatever we can cover, Mark, is going to be the tip of the iceberg. And in no particular order, we acquire figures. And by that, I'm including vehicles, props, sets, aircraft, tanks, artillery, whatever we spend more than $1 on, we're acquiring. And I think we have to be cognizant of what and why we are acquiring. And of course, it shouldn't be blind or irrational. But sometimes that's what it looks like to others when you watch somebody at a toy soldier show or an auction or just buying online. And so I think sometimes we need to take a breath before we leap and just ask yourself or ask ourselves, how many lifeguards do I really need? Do I need 20 more, or is there something else I want or need? And I think there's a subtle difference between nice to have and need to have, and at the same time, you have to account for the price of that figure. And so I don't think it's unreasonable to sort of step back a bit and sort of say, okay, I'm in acquisition mode, but what is it I'm looking for? And really take as I say, a sort of sober second look at what you're doing, because this stuff just doesn't seem to get cheaper. And I think you can just get carried away. It's not that we're hoarders, but when you go shopping for a car, how many cars do you buy in one sitting? And so I sort of think you got to step back sometimes and really think about what you're doing. I think collecting is learning, or at least that should be one of the outcomes. And if you only collect figures related to, let's say, the Crimean War, I personally would expect that you can talk about that point in history, because I really don't know anything about the Crimean War. And if you collect on several themes, I kind of expect that you can converse on those themes. And that's part of the learning process. But sort of as a corollary to that, I think if you're someone who's buying through, let's say, auctions or online, then I think you've learned something, and you should be able to talk about that and share that experience with others and pass that learning on. So to me, collecting is a learning process, and you should be prepared to learn and learn again if necessary, and then share it out in a positive way. And that's one of the things I find really great about the OMSS, is that we have speakers, and often they can be internal to the society, meaning the members, or we go outside and get those speakers, and they add something to the hobby. They add something to our experience. And again, it's all part of the learning. The other point I wanted to make, and I've made it before, and you and I have talked about this, is that information is everywhere. It's not like the 70s where you had to subscribe to something, or you had to show up in person at something, or you had to go to a library. Information's on .com websites. It's on social media platforms like this one. It's in clubs or societies like the OMSS. It's in hard copy books, magazines. But if you aren't looking for information, you aren't learning. And I think you'll miss out on opportunities to either share or gain knowledge or make informed decisions about the path you're on. And ultimately, when you're spending, over $100 or more on a figure, you want to make sure you're making an informed decision there, because that's $100 you're not going to get back. And trust me, it isn't worth $100 the next day. It's the equivalent to buying a new car and driving it off the lot. It depreciates the moment you open the box.
Scott, do you have any regrets purchasing a particular item? Or
when I look back, there's items that I purchased, and I'm sort of looking at them now, and I say, and I think when I bought them, they were uninformed decisions. Or I bought them because I wasn't organized. So I think a lot of us look at our collection as our children. God forbid our own children should be watching this, or our pets. And so there's no pet or child that we don't like. But there's some that if the boat starts sinking, we're going to start getting those out of the boat, because they're nothing but dead weight, right? So in downsizing, they're the first to go. So I don't have any regrets, but I have some questionable decisions that I made in the past. And I'm hoping that as a more mature collector, I'm making more informed decisions. I think often people aren't sure how many figures of Napoleon they actually have. And I believe that actually are tracking this, you'll save money and ultimately that buyer's regret after you've done the purchase. So before I go to a show or event, I have some idea of what's on my bucket list, or what I'm lacking, or what I need to complete my display or set. And those are the things I'm looking for right away. And it's so easy when you get to a show or an auction to get caught up in the moment. It's sort of like when I started talking about acquisition, and you're like a dog in a forest running from tree to tree. If you have some idea of what you need, it makes it easier. This just makes your purchasing more satisfying. For instance, at the 2022 Chicago show, I knew that there was going to be a particular maker. They're called Metal Shed. They're down in Central California, and it's really unique stuff that this guy was making. And so when I got into the show, I went straight to that table. And while the choices were not unlimited, because they had to, of course, bring the stuff all the way from California to Chicago. Remember, it's all just metal. I was able to go across the table and find something within the price point that I was ready to spend. But I did that because I had that on my list. It was not only in bold, but I put a box around it and underlined it. Find Metal Shed. That was a priority. And I think that's what you have to do is, organize what you're looking for, so that you're not missing out on something because you're caught up going through a large bin full of plastic, if that's what you're looking for. Focus is what you should have. Along the same lines, you asked me about, well, is there anything I regret, and we talked about that I've moved a lot over the course of my life, and seemed like every 4 years we were packing up and moving to another location. And we have a theme in our family that when we moved, we would look at our possessions, and if we hadn't seen it, touched it, or worn it in 4 years, we asked the question, why are we still keeping it? And if we couldn't answer that question, then we'd ask, well, then why are we not disposing of it? Move it on. And I think that there may be a legit answer, and you'll want to keep it. But if you kept everything that you own from day one to the day you die, imagine how big a landfill you'd need, or at least your survivors would need, to get rid of your stuff. So what I'm driving at is, it's the same rule for collecting. I think you have to validate what you already have and ask yourself why you're still holding on to it. And particularly if you haven't seen it in years, or you suddenly come across it.
Scott, you say 4 years. My wife, it's 6 months.
There you go. She's running a lean and mean household.
Listen,
that's what you need.
I have to be careful that I don't end up on the curb.
Well, listen, if something's lost its shine or its attraction, or like I say, you haven't seen it for 4 years or 10 years, I think you have to validate why you still have it. And my remark would be, first of all, well, why don't you just sell it, give it away, donate it to an auction like what the OMSS does, and that way you make room for something else, you generate some pocket money for yourself, and maybe you did a nice selfless action. I mean, I've bought and acquired, some of my best purchases have been from collectors who are downsizing or who lost interest in a set or who just kind of looked at it and said, it's just pocket change at the end of the day, make me an offer, that type of thing. And I think that's really good because space is finite. And, if it's, again, I'm not criticizing any specific member or groups of members, but really, unless you're in the retail business, it just seems like a lot of material that you're not enjoying.
What about insurance? Should toy soldier collectors, should they be once they reach a certain point in terms of how many items that they own, should they be insuring their collection?
Yeah, this is a question I was asking a couple of the guys, a couple of years ago. And I think the answer is it depends. And now that's not an answer, but what exactly do you have? What is the estimated replacement value of your collection? Does the cost of insurance exceed the value of your most prized item or items? Do you have a record of your collection? Whoa, there you go, a record. Receipts of purchase, a reliable appraisal acceptable to an insurer. I mean, you just can't put on a rider or put a separate policy on something if you don't know what it's worth or what you have. What is the likelihood of theft or fire where you are? Are there other things which you should be insuring first, like keeping the coverage up on your car, your house? Or do you already have adequate coverage? Listen, I'm sure an insurance company would be happy to take your money. But if you can't answer the most basic of questions about what you have, then I think you have a larger problem. And I've seen some really rare items in my time. And some people run the risk where they sort of say, well, I don't insure it. And that's a decision that you make. Or other people might sit there and say, oh yeah, all my stuff is insured. And you're sort of thinking, yeah, but what is it worth? You have to ask those questions. And so I don't think there is any right answer. It's a very individual answer. And you have to have that with your insurance broker or your insurance company and go from there. And like I say, at the end of the day, I'm sure they're happy to take more money from you. That's a given. That I can tell you, yes.